He hadn't touched a woman in more than 12 years. And now, the first one who tumbled into his arms appeared to have already survived hell. James Coulter had long given up expecting much from life. He lived simply in the arid Arizona hills, with nothing more than a shotgun, a worn cabin, and memories so heavy a man could be buried alive. But that day, everything changed. She staggered out of the edge of the tree-line as if death itself pursued her, barefoot, soot-stained, hardly covered in a torn piece of white fabric that was probably once a dress. Her arms were raw and ripped, her lips dry and bleeding. Her eyes bore the burden of nightmares that no human ever should have to endure. She fell at his feet. No cry, no name. Merely two shattered words escaped her mouth. "Please don't." James stood still. She wasn't bleeding outward, but her shaking body said differently. When he moved forward, she jerked, but didn't back away. Then the cloth moved, and what James saw curdled his stomach. Her back was a map of brutality. Burn marks, welts, convoluted scars, and incised symbols that no human body should know. Someone had inscribed their brutality on her skin. James took a step back. Not from the wounds, not from the blood, but from the manner in which she withdrew into herself, attempting to become invisible, as if she had learned survival through becoming ghostly. And in that second, he was seeing Tennessee again. The war. The girl he could not save. The same shattered gaze. He had left once. He vowed he never would again. So, wordlessly, he shed his coat, slowly and deliberately, and draped it over her shoulders like a promise. Then he scooped her up in his arms and bore her away from whatever horror she had fled. For the first time in years, James Coulter was alive. But what he didn't realize was this. The true storm had yet to start. Within the cabin, he placed her carefully on the old cot against the back wall. The air was cool at night, but for what she had been through, even a summer wind would have seemed icy. She wrapped around herself, holding fast to that coat as if it contained safety itself sewn into its fabric. James didn't question. He didn't want to frighten her, and honestly, he wasn't certain he was prepared for the questions. Instead, he started a fire. Not for warmth, but because the crackle provided the cabin with a heartbeat. She did not move much. Her eyes darted about the room as if each shadow was an adversary. Each creak, each howl of wind against the shutters caused her to jump. James occupied himself with coffee, bitter, stale, but strong. It gave his hands a purpose as his mind ran amok. He sat at the table, stealing glances in her direction. She was shattered, yes, but not lost. The way she clung to that coat assured him she hadn't given up. Later, when it was dark outside, she shifted. For an instant, her eyes met his. No words, no look. Simply a flicker, something human hidden deep within the ruins. James nodded slightly, like a man attuned to the gravity of silence. She turned her face to the wall again. The morning after, her mouth opened, and she whispered her first word. Water. James handed her a cup, slow and steady. She drank carefully, then looked at him longer than before. That look didn't beg for help. It didn't thank him either. It only said one thing. I'm still here. What James couldn't possibly know was that this single word, this single sip of water, would ignite a chain of events that no fire, no shotgun, and no silence could ever stop. She hardly uttered a word that day. Only brief responses, silent nods, and wary looks, as though she wasn't yet certain James existed, or merely another heartless illusion. But by evening, while James sat on the porch whittling the stump of a shattered chair leg, she emerged outside, sat next to him on the stairs, didn't say anything at first, but gazed out into the trees. He hadn't touched a woman in 12 long years, and now the first to fall into his arms appeared to have already endured hell. James Coulter didn't expect much from life anymore. He lived a quiet, hidden-away life in the arid Arizona hills, with nothing but wind, the scent of pine, and the burden of memories he never shared. A cabin, a shotgun, regrets older than the mountains themselves. That was all he had. And then, everything changed. She emerged stumbling from the tree line as if death pursued her. She was barefoot, filthy, clad in nothing but a shreds of white fabric. Part curtain, part dress, but hardly dignity. Her lips were parched, her arms scraped and pink, her entire body shaking as if she'd emerged from flames. She fell at his feet.
No creí.
No name. 2 whispered words. Please don't. James went stiff. She wasn't bleeding much externally, but her body trembled as though her soul was ripped in two. And when the cloth moved just an inch, his gut turned to rock. Her back wasn't scarred. It was etched. Letters. Symbols. Bent burns that had no right on human skin. Someone had etched their ruthlessness into her skin. And in that instant, James wasn't merely looking at her. He was again in Tennessee. Again in the war. Again at the girl he couldn't rescue. The one with the same shattered eyes. He had left her once. Promised never again. So he wrapped her in his coat. Not for comfort but like a vow, and took her inside. He believed the worst was behind him. He had no notion the actual tempest was just at its start. She huddled on his cot inside the cabin, holding that coat as if it were sewn from safety itself. She didn't say a word, didn't cry, just gazed at walls as if they were about to explode at any moment. Any noise outside, any howl of wind, any groan of wood, made her jump. James didn't ask questions. He simply made a fire, not because it was chilly, but because the crackle of flames provided the cabin with a heartbeat. He filled 2 cups of acrid coffee, then sat at the table silently, sneaking peeks. She was breathing. She was living. And that was something. Hours passed before her eyes found his. Just for a second. No words.
No gratitud.
Just the faintest flicker of life refusing to give up. The next morning, she whispered her first word. Water. He handed her a cup, slow and steady. She drank, then looked at him. Not asking, not thanking. Just saying with her eyes, I'm still here. And James knew then, whether he wanted it or not, her story had just become his. She spoke later, in hushed tones, as if she were confessing to specters. She told him of the camp, somewhere that did not exist on any map, where men pushed people to the point of exhaustion, punished them for breathing wrong. She'd attempted to flee before, twice. Once they'd broken her nose. The second time they'd scarred her back like rawhide. The third time, well, she hadn't gotten around to telling that one yet. But just as the sun fell behind the pines, James heard it, horse hooves. Galloping. Up the ridge road. He took his shotgun. Waved her inside. The rider who appeared wasn't a cowboy. He was dressed like a banker who'd drunk himself mean. Greasy mustache, fancy vest, but cruelty in his eyes. He called her by name. Ellie Rose. You've got one chance to come back quiet. James stepped forward, shotgun resting easy in his hands. She's not going anywhere. The man smirked. Ain't up to you, old man. James leveled the shotgun. Not at anything. Not yet. Just far enough to remind him where he was. The rider spit in the dirt, spun his horse, and took off. But the look he threw over his shoulder on the way out, it guaranteed one thing: he'd return. And he wouldn't come alone. 3 tense days went by. The kind of silence that isn't peace, it's waiting. James cleaned his shotgun repeatedly, and Ellie hung in close. No need to say a word. They both knew trouble was on the horizon. And then it arrived. 3 men rode down the ridge. The same banker-looking thug among them. This time he didn't speak. He yelled, "Step aside, old man." James didn't. The second rider twitched toward his gun. James fired first. The man toppled, screaming, blood soaking his leg. The other 2 froze. And then another voice. Calm. Sharp. Deadly steady. I'd think real hard about your next move. From the tree line, a man stepped out. Badge gleaming on his chest. Rifle in hand. Abram Hale. James's old war brother. Now sheriff of the territory. Abram's voice came like steel. This is my territory. And she's in my care now. The riders departed. Not quickly, not vanquished, but with threats they'd return. That evening, as dust accumulated and the world became quiet, James came to understand something. This wasn't all about Ellie anymore. and it was no longer about him. This was the beginning of a war neither of them wished for, but both of them would have to see through. And if you're still here, it's because you're the type who needs to know what happens at the end. Trust me, you don't want to miss the next part. So click on that subscribe button because the West doesn't do fairy tales. Out here, tales don't get finished. They just keep on writing.